The scratching came in waves, 12 sets of claws against frozen wood, desperate and dying. Nora pressed her back against the cabin door, her breath forming pale clouds in the frigid air. The fire in her hearth had burned down to embers, but she didn't move to feed it. She couldn't, not when they were out there. For 2 years she had lived by a single rule: stay hidden, stay safe, stay alone. The mountain had been her sanctuary, her prison, her penance. In all that time she had seen exactly 3 living souls, a pair of ravens that nested in the pine outside her window, and a fox that sometimes watched her from the tree line with curious amber eyes. She had grown accustomed to silence. She had learned to fill the emptiness with the rhythm of her own routines, tending her herb garden in summer, preserving roots and berries before the first snow, talking to herself just to remember what her voice sounded like. The scratching came again, harder this time, more urgent. Through the gaps in the wooden planks she could see movement, massive shapes shifting in the whiteout conditions, their forms barely visible against the swirling snow. The blizzard had been building for hours, transforming from a gentle snowfall into something savage and alive. The wind didn't just howl, it screamed, rattling the shutters and tearing at the roof with furious claws. Nora's hands trembled as she gripped the worn fabric of her grandmother's shawl, tighter, around her shoulders. She knew what was out there. Wolves. Not the ordinary kind that roamed these mountains, but something else, something bigger. She had caught glimpses of them through the window an hour ago. 12 massive creatures with fur as white as the snow that buried them, moving through the storm like ghosts. They were dying. She knew this with the same certainty she knew which herbs would break a fever or which poultice would draw infection from a wound. Her grandmother had called it the healer's eye, the ability to see suffering and know, instinctively, what was needed. It was a gift Nora had spent 2 years trying to bury along with everything else she had left behind. Let them die, a voice whispered in the dark corners of her mind. You can't save everyone. You couldn't even save yourself. But another voice, quieter, older, achingly familiar, spoke beneath it. Her grandmother's voice, weathered and warm. A healer who turns away from suffering is no healer at all, child. We don't choose who deserves our compassion. We simply give it and trust that the giving matters. The scratching stopped. In the sudden silence, Nora's heart hammered against her ribs. Had they left? Had they given up and stumbled back into the storm to die somewhere she couldn't hear them? Then came a new sound, a low, plaintive whine that pierced straight through the door and lodged itself in her chest like a splinter. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't threatening. It was begging. Nora closed her eyes and saw with perfect clarity the moment that had broken her. The pack gathering, Garrett's hand clasped firmly in Celeste's, the words that had echoed through the assembly hall. I reject you as my mate, Nora Ashwood. The bond is severed. The feeling of something fundamental tearing loose inside her, like roots being ripped from frozen ground. She had sworn that night that she would never let anyone close enough to hurt her again, that she would never be vulnerable, never be seen, never offer her heart only to have it handed back like something defective and unwanted. But these weren't people. These were wolves, and they were dying on her doorstep, while she stood paralyzed by fear. Nora's hand moved to the iron latch before she could stop herself. Her grandmother had taught her many things: how to set bones, how to recognize silver poisoning, how to coax reluctant herbs to grow in rocky soil. But the most important lesson had been this: fear is just frozen compassion, Nora. You have to melt it before it can flow. She took a breath that burned her lungs with cold. Then she opened the door. The blizzard hit her like a physical force, stealing her breath and driving ice crystals into her exposed skin. But it was nothing compared to what she saw. 12 wolves, each one massive enough to be mistaken for a small bear, lay collapsed in the snow at her threshold. Their white fur was matted with ice and blood, their flanks heaving with labored breaths. Steam rose from their bodies in the frigid air, creating ghostly halos around each creature. And their eyes, gods above, their eyes. Each wolf had eyes that glowed an otherworldly blue, like moonlight captured in ice. They watched her with an intelligence that was distinctly, unsettlingly human. The largest wolf lay closest to her door, one massive paw still raised as if it had been in mid-scratch when consciousness finally fled. Even collapsed and wounded, it was breathtaking. Easily twice the size of any wolf Nora had ever seen, with a regal bearing that spoke of dominance even in weakness. A jagged wound ran along its shoulder, and frost had begun to form on its muzzle. Its eyes met hers, and Nora felt something shift inside her chest. A strange tug, like a thread being pulled taut. She had no time to examine the feeling. The wolves were shutting down, their bodies surrendering to hypothermia. If she didn't act now, they would die. Inside, she heard herself say, her voice hoarse from disuse, "Come on, inside, now." It took every ounce of strength she possessed to drag the first wolf across her threshold, then the second, the third. They didn't resist. They were too far gone for that, but their sheer size made the task nearly impossible. Her arms screamed in protest. Her back felt like it might snap. Sweat froze on her temples despite the cold, but she didn't stop. A healer who turns away from suffering is no healer at all. By the time she pulled the 12th wolf inside and slammed the door against the storm, her small cabin had transformed into something from a fever dream. 12 massive white wolves lay sprawled across every available surface. On her rug, against her furniture, pressed against the walls. There was barely room for her to move, and they were all watching her with those strange, glowing blue eyes. Nora stood in the center of the chaos, chest heaving, platinum hair plastered to her face with melted snow and sweat. For a moment she was frozen again, not by fear this time, but by the sheer enormity of what she had just done. She had opened her door. She had let them in. She had chosen connection over safety. The largest wolf, the one with the silver-blue eyes that seemed to hold entire galaxies, made a low sound in its throat. Not a growl, something softer, almost like gratitude. Nora swallowed hard and moved toward her grandmother's old medicine chest. Her hand shook as she gathered supplies, yarrow and comfrey for the wounds, warming stones for the frostbite, clean water and cloths, her precious store of honey for energy. "I don't know why you're here," she whispered to the wolves, to herself, to the storm that raged outside. "I don't know what you are, but you're not dying tonight, not on my watch." As she knelt beside the largest wolf to begin treating its wounds, its eyes closed in what looked like relief. But just before unconsciousness claimed it, Nora could have sworn she saw something impossible in that ancient, knowing gaze. Recognition. Who is Nora? She is a 24-year-old Omega born to the Silverbrook Pack, the daughter of a respected warrior and a healer. Her childhood was marked by her grandmother's patient teachings in the herbalist's craft, and the expectation that she would one day find her fated mate and serve her pack as a healer. She was gentle, compassionate, and deeply empathetic, traits her pack valued in an Omega. With her ethereal platinum blonde hair and pale winter dawn eyes, She looked like something carved from moonlight and frost. Everything changed the night of her 20th birthday, when the mate bond snapped into place with Garrett Thorne, the pack's future beta and her childhood friend. For one blazing, perfect moment, Nora felt complete. Then she saw his face, saw the horror, the panic, the rejection written there before he even spoke the words. 3 days later, in front of the entire pack, Garrett publicly rejected their bond and announced his chosen pairing with Nora's sister, Celeste. The reason was never explicitly stated, but Nora heard the whispers, too weak, too soft, not strong enough to stand beside a beta, not worthy. The rejection didn't just break the mate bond, it broke something fundamental in Nora's sense of self. Her wolf, which had only just awakened with the mating bond, retreated so deep inside her that Nora could no longer feel its presence. She became functionally human, cut off from the very essence of what made her pack, what made her whole. Unable to bear the pitying looks and whispered gossip, Nora fled into the wilderness. She found this abandoned cabin deep in the mountains, a place her grandmother had once used for gathering rare herbs, and she rebuilt it into a shelter. For 2 years she has lived in complete isolation, surviving on her knowledge of plants and her grandmother's teachings, speaking to no one, touching no one, trusting no one. She has convinced herself that she is content with this half-life, that safety and solitude are preferable to vulnerability and pain, that she is better off alone because at least alone she cannot be rejected again. But deep in her heart, in the place where her wolf once lived, there is a desperate, aching question she has never been able to silence. Was he right? Is there something wrong with me? Am I truly unworthy of love? What is happening outside her door? The blizzard is the worst storm to hit the northern mountains in a generation. It came without warning, transforming from gentle snow to a whiteout maelstrom in less than an hour. The temperature has plummeted to lethal levels. Visibility is 0. The wind carries enough force to snap branches and tear shutters from their hinges. Somewhere out in that frozen hell, Alpha King Lucian and his elite royal guard, 12 of the strongest wolves in the realm, are dying. They had been on a routine patrol of the kingdom's northern border when the storm struck. Caught in the open, far from shelter, they made the decision to push forward rather than retreat. It should have been manageable. These were not ordinary wolves. They were trained warriors, powerful shifters, survivors of countless battles. But the storm was not ordinary either, and even kings can freeze. When they caught the scent of wood smoke and herbs on the wind, it was Lucian's wolf who surged forward with desperate intensity, leading the group toward salvation with an instinct that went deeper than survival. His wolf knew, even if the man didn't yet understand, mate, shelter, home. The scratching at Nora's door isn't random. It's fate, disguised as a blizzard, forcing 2 broken souls together in the only way they would have accepted, through necessity, through compassion, through the undeniable truth that some connections are stronger than fear. Inside the cabin, Nora, who has spent 2 years building walls around her heart, now surrounded by 12 unconscious wolves who have invaded her sanctuary. Outside the cabin, a storm that shows no signs of stopping, ensuring that whatever happens next will happen in this small, intimate space with nowhere to hide. And in the center of it all, the largest wolf, whose silver blue eyes hold secrets that will change everything. Dawn is coming, and with it, the moment when wolves become men, and Nora discovers that saving them was the easy part. Learning to save herself will be far more terrifying. Ghosts in the snow, The first wolf was impossibly heavy. Nora wrapped both arms around its massive chest and pulled, her boots sliding on the icy floorboards as she hauled the creature backward across her threshold. Its white fur was crusted with ice that cut into her palms, and its body radiated a coldness that had nothing to do with the storm. This was the cold of approaching death, seeping outward from somewhere deep inside. The wolf's head lolled against her shoulder as she dragged it toward the hearth, and she felt the faint flutter of its heartbeat against her forearm. Still alive. Barely. "Stay with me," she whispered, though she didn't know why she was talking to an unconscious animal. Maybe because the silence of the past 2 years had finally become unbearable. Maybe because speaking kept her moving when every muscle screamed at her to stop. She left the first wolf on her rug and turned back to the open door. The blizzard howled through the gap like a living thing, angry at being denied its prey. Snow swirled across her floor in violent eddies. The second wolf lay just outside, its blue eyes half closed, frost forming on its muzzle with each labored breath. Nora didn't let herself think. Thinking meant remembering why she had sworn never to open this door. Thinking meant acknowledging the terror clawing at her throat. She grabbed the second wolf and pulled, then the third, the fourth, the fifth. Her arms went numb somewhere around the seventh wolf. Her grandmother's shawl slipped from her shoulders and disappeared beneath a pile of white fur. Sweat froze in her hair. The cabin that had felt spacious in her solitude now seemed impossibly small, filling with massive bodies that shouldn't exist. Wolves the size of bears, with eyes that glowed like captured moonlight. The 11th wolf made a sound as she dragged it inside, a low whine that vibrated through her bones and made something ache in the center of her chest, where her wolf should have been. She paused, one hand resting on its heaving side, feeling the desperate labor of each breath. "I know," she told it softly. "I know it hurts. Just hold on." The largest wolf still lay outside, the storm already beginning to bury it beneath fresh snow. Nora's legs trembled as she stepped back into the blizzard, the wind hitting her with enough force to steal her breath. This one was different from the others. Even collapsed and dying, it radiated power, something ancient and absolute that made her instincts scream at her to submit, to lower her eyes, to back away slowly. Instead, she knelt beside it in the snow, its eyes opened, silver blue and infinite, and locked onto hers with an intensity that stopped her heart. For one suspended moment, the storm disappeared. The cold disappeared. Everything disappeared except those eyes and the strange, terrible recognition she saw there. Then the moment shattered. The wolf's eyes rolled back, its body went limp, and Nora was once again just a terrified woman, dragging an impossible creature through an impossible storm. She pulled the Alpha King across her threshold and slammed the door against the night, sealing herself inside with 12 ghosts made of snow and starlight, the healer's hands. Nora moved through the chaos with the practiced efficiency her grandmother had drilled into her bones. Panic was a luxury healers couldn't afford. Fear could wait. Right now, 12 lives hung in the balance, and her hands knew what to do, even when her mind wanted to shut down. She started with the smallest wolf, a female with a gash along her ribs that had already begun to fester. Nora cleaned the wound with water she'd heated over the fire, her fingers steady despite the trembling that had settled into her shoulders. Yarrow to stop the bleeding, comfrey paste to encourage healing, honey to fight infection. The familiar rhythm steadied her breathing, pulled her into the space where nothing existed except the work. The wolf's breathing eased as Nora wrapped clean linen around its torso. One down, 11 to go. She moved to the next, then the next, treating frostbitten paws with warming compresses, setting a dislocated shoulder with a sickening pop that made her stomach turn, wrapping wounds that looked suspiciously like claw marks. These wolves hadn't just been caught in the storm. They'd been fighting something before it hit. Hours blurred together. The fire burned low, and she fed it without thinking, her movements automatic. Outside, the blizzard raged with undiminished fury, rattling the shutters and howling down the chimney. Inside, the cabin had become a makeshift infirmary that smelled of blood and herbs and wet fur. Nora avoided the largest wolf as long as she could. It lay near the hearth where she'd left it, taking up an impossible amount of space. Even unconscious, it dominated the room with a presence that made her skin prickle with awareness. She treated the wolves around it, working in careful circles, always keeping it in her peripheral vision, but never looking directly at those silver blue eyes, because they were open, watching her. The wound on its shoulder was deep, and when she finally forced herself to kneel beside it, her hands shook, for the first time all night. This close, she could see the power contained in its frame, muscles that could tear through steel, jaws that could crush bone. One wrong move, and it could kill her before she drew her next breath. "I'm going to clean this," she whispered, more to herself than the wolf. "It's going to hurt." She pressed the cloth to the wound. The wolf's body went rigid, a low rumble building in its chest. But it didn't move, didn't snap, just watched her with those ancient knowing eyes that seemed to see straight through her skin to the broken thing hiding underneath. Nora worked faster, desperate to finish and escape that gaze. Her grandmother had once told her that wolves could sense weakness, could smell fear like blood in water. What else could this creature sense? Could it feel the hollow place where her wolf should be? Could it see the shame she carried like a second skin? She tied off the bandage with trembling fingers and pulled back. The wolf made a sound, low and soft, almost like a purr. Its massive head shifted, moving closer to where she knelt, and before Nora could retreat, it pressed its muzzle against her palm. The touch burned through her like lightning. For 2 years, she hadn't felt anything through the bond space where her wolf once lived. Just emptiness, just silence. But this was different. This was a pull so strong it made her bones ache, a recognition so deep it terrified her. Nora yanked her hand back and scrambled to her feet, her heart hammering against her ribs. The wolf watched her retreat with something that looked disturbingly like understanding. She turned away and busied herself, checking the other wolves, but she could feel its gaze following her through the darkness, patient and inexorable as the dawn. When wolves become men, dawn came slowly, painting the snow-covered world in shades of rose and gold. The storm had finally exhausted itself sometime before sunrise, leaving behind an unnatural silence that pressed against Nora's ears like cotton. She stood at the window, her body running on nothing but nervous energy and the half-cup of chicory coffee she'd managed to choke down. Behind her, 12 wolves slept in various states of recovery, their breathing deep and even. The largest one, the one whose eyes had followed her all night, had finally closed its eyes an hour ago, though Nora suspected it was only pretending to sleep. The first shift happened without warning. One moment, Nora was watching the sunrise. The next, she heard the distinctive crack and pop of bones rearranging themselves. She spun around, her hand flying to her mouth. The female wolf with the wounded ribs was no longer a wolf. A woman lay in its place, naked and shivering, with silver hair and a face too beautiful to be entirely human. Then another shift. and another. The cabin filled with the sound of transformation, that wet, organic symphony that every shifter learned to recognize. Within minutes, 12 humans lay sprawled across her floor in various states of undress, and Nora stood frozen, her back pressed against the window, trying not to look at the expanse of bare skin that suddenly surrounded her. "Blankets," she managed, her voice strangled. "I need blankets." She grabbed every spare blanket and fur she owned, tossing them toward the slowly waking figures with her eyes half closed. This was not how she'd imagined this moment going. She'd expected... what? A polite transformation? A warning? "Well," a male voice drawled from somewhere near the hearth, rough with sleep and pain. "That's one way to wake up." Nora refused to look. She kept her gaze fixed, firmly on the ceiling beams while sounds of movement and muttered curses filled the cabin. Fabric rustled. Someone groaned. Another voice hissed something that sounded like a warning. "You can look now, little Omega. We're decent." That voice was different from the others, deeper. It didn't just speak. It commanded, carrying the kind of authority that made her wolfless body want to bow, even though she had no wolf to submit with. Nora lowered her gaze slowly. 11 warriors stood around her cabin, wrapped in her blankets and furs, watching her with expressions ranging from gratitude to confusion to barely concealed curiosity. But Nora barely saw them. Her attention locked on the man standing beside her hearth, and the world tilted sideways. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders barely contained by the fur he'd wrapped around his waist. His hair was black as midnight, longer on top and shorter on the sides, and his skin bore the kind of scars that spoke of battles survived, rather than avoided. But it was his eyes that stopped her breath. Those same silver-blue eyes that had watched her all night, now set in a face carved from stone and shadow, and something approaching divine cruelty. He was beautiful in the way winter storms were beautiful, deadly and absolute and impossible to look away from. "You saved our lives," he said, his voice sending vibrations through her chest. "I am Lucian Thorn, Alpha King of the Northern Territories." He paused, and something fierce and possessive flashed through those magnificent eyes. "And you, little healer, are mine." The words hit her like a physical blow. Behind her, she heard several sharp intakes of breath from the other warriors. Someone whispered a curse. Nora's legs gave out, and she slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, staring up at the Alpha King with her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. "No," she whispered. "That's not possible." Lucian smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing she'd ever seen. "I'm afraid it is." The king's recognition. "No." The word came out sharper this time, edged with something close to hysteria. Nora pushed herself up the wall, putting as much distance between herself and the Alpha King as her small cabin would allow. "You're mistaken. You have to be." Lucian took a step toward her, moving with a predator's grace despite his injuries. The fur around his waist shifted dangerously low on his hips, and Nora forced her eyes to stay fixed on his face. "I am not mistaken. My wolf recognized you the moment you opened that door. The bond." "There is no bond." Her voice cracked on the words. "I can't. I don't have..." She couldn't finish. How did you explain to an Alpha King that you were broken? That whatever mechanism allowed wolves to feel the mate bond had been shattered inside you 2 years ago, torn out by the roots, and left to wither? One of the female warriors stepped forward, her silver hair still damp from the shift. "Your Majesty, perhaps we should give her time. She's clearly in shock. She spent all night saving our lives, and now we're... Kira. Lucian didn't raise his voice, but the single word carried enough command to make the warrior fall silent and step back. His eyes never left Nora's face. "How long have you been alone here?" The question caught her off guard. "That's none of your... How long?" 2 years, she whispered, hating how small her voice sounded. 2 years, 3 months, and 16 days. Something flickered across Lucian's face, something that looked disturbingly like understanding. "And before that? Where was your pack?" "I don't have a pack." The words tasted like ash. "Not anymore." "Why?" "Because I was rejected. Because I wasn't good enough. Because my own mate looked at me and chose someone else." The thoughts screamed through her head, but she couldn't force them past her lips. Instead, she wrapped her arms around herself and turned toward the window, unable to bear the weight of his gaze any longer. "This is a mistake," she said quietly. "Fate already made its choice about me. I had a mate. He rejected the bond. She swallowed hard. "I'm not mate material, Your Majesty. You should take your people and leave before you realize it too." The silence that followed was suffocating. Nora could feel 11 pairs of eyes boring into her back, but she refused to turn around. If she turned around, she would have to see the pity, or worse, the confirmation that she was right. "Who?" Lucian's voice had gone deadly quiet. "Who rejected you?" "It doesn't matter. His name." "It was 2 years ago. It's done. Finished. I've moved on." The lie tasted bitter, but she forced it out anyway. "So you see, whatever you think you felt, it's wrong. I can't be your mate because I already had one, and he..." Her voice broke. "He didn't want me." She heard movement behind her, felt the heat of Lucian's body as he crossed the room in 3 strides. His hand caught her shoulder, gentle but inexorable, and turned her to face him. This close, she could see flecks of storm gray in those silver-blue eyes, could smell pine and snow, and something wild that made her broken bond space ache with phantom sensation. "Listen to me very carefully, little Omega." His thumb traced along her collarbone, the touch sending electricity racing through her veins. "I have walked this earth for 32 years. I have met thousands of wolves, searched every territory, attended every gathering. I had resigned myself to the possibility that my mate simply didn't exist." His other hand came up to cup her face, forcing her to hold his gaze. "Then I caught your scent through a blizzard, and my wolf nearly tore through my skin to get to you. When you touched me last night, I felt the bond snap into place so hard it drove me to my knees. So no, little one, this is not a mistake." Nora's breath came in shallow gasps. "But I can't feel it. I can't feel anything. My wolf is... She's gone. She's been gone since the rejection." Lucian's jaw clenched, fury flashing through his eyes. "What that male did to you was an abomination. But it didn't break you, Nora. It buried you." He leaned closer, his forehead nearly touching hers. "And I am very, very good at digging up buried treasure." Snowbound confessions. The mountain pass wouldn't clear for 3 days. Kira delivered this news with an apologetic grimace after scouting the terrain that first morning. The storm had dumped enough snow to bury the trail completely, and the temperature had dropped so low that attempting the descent would be suicide. They were trapped, 12 royal guards and 1 terrified Omega in a cabin built for solitude. Lucian took the news with frustrating calm. "Then we make ourselves useful." By midday, the cabin had been transformed into something resembling organized chaos. The male warriors had constructed a makeshift shelter outside, a lean-to built against the cabin's north wall, where they could sleep, without crowding Nora's space. The females claimed the area near the hearth, and Lucian, despite Nora's increasingly frantic protests, refused to sleep anywhere except directly in front of her bedroom door. "You're injured," she'd argued, watching him arrange furs on the floor with maddening precision. "You should be resting, not protecting my mate." He'd looked up at her with those impossible eyes, and the words died in her throat. "That's not negotiable, Nora." The guards moved through her space with surprising care, fixing the shutters that had rattled for months, reinforcing the roof, splitting wood for her dwindling supply. Kira organized Nora's scattered herb stores with an efficiency that suggested military training. Another guard, a massive male named Theron, spent an entire afternoon repairing the front door, which had cracked under the assault of desperate claws. Nora tried to help, tried to maintain some sense of control over her invaded sanctuary. But every time she moved, she found Lucian watching her with that patient, predatory intensity that made her skin feel too tight. On the second night, she finally broke. "Why are you doing this?" She stood at the kitchen basin, washing the dinner dishes with more force than necessary. Behind her, Lucian sat at her small table, sharpening a knife he'd found in her neglected tool chest. The metallic whisper of blade against stone filled the silence. "Doing what?" "Pretending." She gripped the edge of the basin until her knuckles went white. "Pretending that this is." The words tangled on her tongue. "You're a king. You could have anyone. Why waste time on someone who's already been rejected?" The scraping stopped. "You can say the word, Nora. It won't break you any more than you already believe you're broken." She flinched. "That's not—" "Tell me about him." Lucian's voice had gone soft, but there was steel underneath. The male who couldn't see what was right in front of him. "There's nothing to tell." "His name. Why does it matter?" She spun to face him, and the tears she'd been holding back for 2 days finally spilled over. "Why do you care? It was 2 years ago. I'm over it. I'm fine." Lucian stood slowly, setting the knife aside. "You're not fine. You're hiding in a cabin on a mountain, talking to yourself because you're afraid to let anyone close enough to hurt you again." He crossed the small space between them. "And you're lying to yourself if you think that's the same as healing." "Stop." The word came out broken. "Please just stop. You don't understand. Then make me understand." He caught her wrists gently, his thumbs tracing circles over her racing pulse. "Tell me his name. Tell me what he did. Tell me why you believe his rejection was truth instead of the cowardice it was." And somehow, trapped between the basin and the Alpha King, with nowhere left to run, the words finally came. "Garrett Thorne." She watched Lucian's face carefully, saw the flash of recognition. "The Silverbrook Beta's son. We grew up together. The bond snapped on my 20th birthday, and for 3 days I thought—" Her voice cracked. "I thought I was going to have everything I'd ever wanted." "What happened?" "He rejected me in front of the entire pack, chose my sister instead." The memory still had teeth. "He said," she swallowed hard, "he said I wasn't strong enough, that the pack needed a beta female who could stand beside him, not someone who would rather heal than fight." Lucian's hands tightened on her wrists, and when she looked up, she saw murder in his eyes. "Where is he now?" "It doesn't matter. Where is he now?" The deadly quiet in his voice should have terrified her. Instead, it kindled something warm and fierce in her chest, something that felt dangerously like hope. "Still at Silverbrook," she whispered, "with Celeste." Lucian smiled, and it was the smile of a wolf who'd just scented prey. "Good. the Omega's choice. The pass cleared on the morning of the 4th day, revealed by pale sunlight that turned the snow into fields of diamonds. Nora stood in her doorway watching Kira and Theron test the trail, their footprints dark against the pristine white. Behind her, the cabin felt simultaneously too small and unbearably empty, with the knowledge that soon it would return to silence. She'd grown accustomed to voices again, to the sound of laughter around her table, to Kira's sharp wit and Theron's terrible jokes, to the way the guards moved through her space like they belonged there, like she belonged with them, to Lucian's presence at her back, constant as gravity. "The trail's stable, Your Majesty," Kira called from the tree line. "We can leave within the hour." Nora's hands tightened on the doorframe. This was what she'd wanted, what she'd been waiting for. Her sanctuary returned, her solitude restored, everything back to the way it was supposed to be. So why did it feel like something vital was being torn away? She felt Lucian approach before she heard him, that strange awareness that had grown stronger over the past 3 days. He stopped, just behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body but not quite touching. "Come with us." The words were quiet, simple, but they carried the weight of everything unspoken between them. Nora closed her eyes. "I can't. Can't or won't? Does it matter?" She forced herself to turn and face him. In the morning light, he looked less like the terrifying Alpha King who'd invaded her cabin, and more like just a man, tired, still healing, with shadows under those silver-blue eyes that suggested he'd slept as poorly as she had. "This is my home, my life. I've built something here, and I can't just run away from it the moment something scares you." His lips curved into a sad smile. "I know. That's what makes this so hard." She blinked. "What? You think I don't see it? You've convinced yourself that staying here is strength, that isolation is safety. But Nora..." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face with a gentleness that made her chest ache. "This isn't living. This is penance, and you have nothing to atone for. You don't understand, then help me understand. Come to the Northern Crown, not forever, not as my mate if you're not ready." His thumb traced her cheekbone, and she hated how her body leaned into the touch. "Just come. See what exists beyond this mountain. Meet the pack. Let me show you that not everyone will reject you. That some of us..." His voice dropped. "That some of us would burn the world down before we let you go." The intensity in his eyes should have sent her running. Instead, it ignited something she'd thought long dead, a tiny spark of want, of maybe, of what if. "I can't promise anything," she whispered. "I can't. If I come, it doesn't mean..." "I know." He pressed his forehead to hers, and the touch felt more intimate than any kiss. "I'm not asking for promises. I'm asking for a chance. One chance to prove that what happened to you was an aberration, not the truth of who you are." Nora's breath shuddered out. Every instinct screamed at her to say no, to retreat back into the safety of her cabin and her herbs and her carefully constructed solitude. But another voice, quieter, deeper, achingly familiar, whispered something different. Her grandmother's voice. "Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone see you, child. All of you, even the broken parts." "1 month," Nora heard herself say. "I'll come for 1 month, but I'm not... This doesn't mean..." She didn't get to finish. Lucian pulled her against his chest, his arms wrapping around her with a fierceness that stole her breath. She felt his heart hammering against her cheek, felt the tremor that ran through his frame. 1 month, he agreed roughly. That's all I'm asking. Kira's voice drifted from outside, carefully neutral. We should leave soon, Your Majesty, before the temperature drops. Lucian pulled back slowly, his hand sliding down to capture Nora's. Pack what you need. We'll wait. As Nora moved through her cabin gathering clothes and herbs with shaking hands, she caught her reflection in the small mirror above her basin. The woman staring back looked terrified, but beneath the fear, barely visible, was something else. Something that looked dangerously like hope. The Palace of Wolves. Nothing could have prepared Nora for the Northern Crown. The territory sprawled across a valley like something from a fever dream. Not a single building, but a complex of stone structures, connected by covered walkways, all of it built into the mountainside itself. Waterfalls cascaded down the cliffs behind the main hall, their mist creating permanent rainbows in the afternoon light. Hundreds of wolves moved through the grounds, their voices carrying on the wind, their laughter echoing off stone walls. Nora's fingers dug into the horse's mane as they descended the final ridge. Beside her, Lucian rode with the easy confidence of a man returning home. But she caught the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes constantly flickered to her face as if checking that she hadn't bolted. She wanted to. Gods, how she wanted to. Breathe, Kira murmured from her other side. They're curious, not hostile. You saved their king's life. That matters. But when they passed through the main gates, Nora understood the difference between theory and reality. Wolves lined the pathways, hundreds of them, all turning to stare as the royal party rode past. The whispers started immediately, rippling through the crowd like wind through grass. No pack scent. Where did he find her? Can't be his mate. Look at her. Too thin, too pale, probably won't survive the winter. Nora kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, but each whispered word landed like a blade. She felt herself shrinking, curling inward the way she had at Silverbrook, when the pitying looks became too much to bear. Lucian's hand shot out and caught her reins, bringing her horse alongside his. Look at me. When she didn't respond, his voice sharpened. Nora, eyes on me. She forced herself to meet his gaze. The fury she found there was breathtaking. They don't matter, he said quietly, but every wolf within earshot fell silent at his tone. Their opinions, their speculation, their small-minded judgment, none of it matters. Do you understand? She wanted to believe him, but the weight of all those eyes made it hard to breathe. The main hall was worse. Lucian led her through massive oak doors into a space that could have held her entire cabin 50 times over. Wolves in fine clothes clustered in small groups, their conversations dying the moment Nora appeared. A woman in silk robes, older, with silver streaking through her dark hair, approached with the fluid grace of high rank. Your Majesty. Her smile was polite, but her eyes catalogued every inch of Nora with surgical precision. We weren't expecting you to return with a guest. Lady Moira. Lucian's hand found the small of Nora's back, a touch of clear possession. This is Nora Ashwood. She'll be staying in the Luna's quarters. The silence that followed was deafening. Someone dropped a glass. The sharp crack echoed through the hall like a gunshot. The Luna's quarters. Lady Moira's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in her eyes. How unexpected. Those rooms have been empty for 3 decades, Your Majesty. Perhaps somewhere more modest would be appropriate for a... Her gaze raked over Nora again. Guest. The Luna's quarters, Lucian repeated, and this time there was no mistaking the command. She saved my life and the lives of my guard. She will be afforded every courtesy and respect due to someone of importance to the crown. Is that understood? Murmurs rippled through the assembled wolves. Nora caught fragments. Just a guest. Claiming her already. Doesn't even have a pack. A younger male stepped forward, his handsome face arranged in careful neutrality. Your Majesty, forgive me, but the court has a right to questions. This woman appears from nowhere, with no pack, no family, no— Careful, Marcus. Lucian's voice dropped to a dangerous purr. Very careful how you finish that sentence. But the damage was done. Nora could feel the skepticism, the barely concealed disdain, the certainty in every face that she didn't belong here, that she was an interloper, an embarrassment, a mistake the king would realize soon enough. The walls pressed in. The air grew too thin. Somewhere in the crowd, a woman laughed, high and cruel, and the sound transported Nora back to Silverbrook, to standing in front of the pack while Garrett's hand clasped Celeste's, while her world crumbled, and no one, not one single wolf, had spoken in her defense. I need— the words barely made it past her constricted throat. I need air. She turned and fled before Lucian could stop her, his voice calling her name swallowed by the sudden roar of blood. In her ears. The sisters' arrival. Nora found sanctuary in the gardens behind the main hall, where ancient willows draped their branches like curtains, and the sound of falling water drowned out everything else. She pressed her back against rough bark and tried to remember how to breathe, tried to convince herself that running was still an option, that she could find her way back to the mountain before. So, this is where you've been hiding. The voice froze the blood in her veins. She knew that voice, had grown up listening to it, had once thought it the most beautiful sound in the world, before she learned that beautiful things often had the sharpest teeth. Celeste stood at the garden entrance, backlit by the late afternoon sun in a way that made her look ethereal. She'd always known how to position herself for maximum impact. Her dark hair cascaded over one shoulder in artful waves, and her dress, deep emerald, that matched her eyes, probably cost more than Nora's cabin. Behind her, half hidden in shadow, stood Garrett. Celeste, Nora's voice came out steady, which felt like a small miracle. What are you doing here? Diplomatic delegation from Silverbrook. Her sister glided forward with that practiced grace that had always made Nora feel clumsy by comparison. Imagine my surprise when the rumors reached us. My little sister, seducing the Alpha King. She tilted her head, her smile sharp as broken glass. I had to see it for myself. I didn't seduce anyone. No? Celeste's eyes swept over Nora's simple wool dress, her hastily braided hair, her still pale face. Then how exactly does a packless Omega with no status, no power, and no prospects end up in the Luna's quarters? It's quite the accomplishment, Nora. I'm almost impressed. Garrett shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. He looked older than Nora remembered, harder around the edges with new lines bracketing his mouth. His eyes met hers for one brief moment before sliding away, and in that glance she saw something that might have been regret. It meant nothing. Too little, too late. The king and I— Nora started, but Celeste laughed, the sound like bells dipped in poison. Oh, please, everyone knows what's happening here. You saved his life, and he feels obligated, honor-bound. She stepped closer, dropping her voice to a conspiratorial whisper that somehow felt more violent than shouting. But obligation fades, little sister. And when it does, where will you be? Back on your mountain alone. Except this time you'll have lost something even bigger than Garrett. The words hit their mark with surgical precision. Nora had spent 3 days convincing herself that maybe Lucian was different, that maybe this could be real, but hearing her own fears spoken aloud in Celeste's honey-poison voice made them solidify into certainty. "I never asked for this," Nora whispered. "You never ask for anything. That's always been your problem." Celeste examined her nails with studied disinterest. "You just take what doesn't belong to you and act surprised when it gets ripped away. First you tried to trap Garrett with a bond he never wanted. That's not what happened. And now you're doing the same thing to the Alpha King, using gratitude and guilt to manipulate him into believing you're something you're not." Celeste's eyes hardened. "But we both know the truth, don't we? You're broken, Nora. You have been since the rejection. And broken things don't become Luna. That's enough." The new voice cut through the garden like a blade. Lucian emerged from behind the willows, and the fury radiating from him made the air shimmer. Behind him, Kira and Theron flanked the entrance, blocking any escape. Celeste's mask of confidence slipped for just a moment before she rearranged her features into a gracious smile. "Your Majesty, I was just leaving." Lucian's eyes had gone full wolf, that eerie silver-blue glow that promised violence. "You and your companion will depart the Northern Crown immediately. Your delegation status is revoked. But your Majesty, surely, now." The word shook the ground. "Before I forget that diplomatic immunity means I can't rip your throat out for speaking to my mate that way." Garrett finally moved, stepping forward with his hands raised in supplication. "Your Majesty, please. Lady Celeste meant no disrespect. She's simply concerned for her sister." Lucian's head snapped toward him, and Garrett actually stumbled backward. "You." The Alpha King's voice dropped to something subterranean and terrible. "You're the one who rejected her." It wasn't a question. Garrett's face went pale. "I want you to look at her," Lucian commanded, moving to stand beside Nora. His hand found hers, threading their fingers together. "Look at what you threw away, what you were too blind and stupid to value." Nora tried to pull her hand free, mortification burning through her, but Lucian's grip was gentle steel. Garrett's eyes finally met hers fully, and she saw the truth written there, the regret, the recognition of his mistake, the knowledge that he'd chosen wrong and would spend his life knowing it. "Now get out of my territory," Lucian said softly, "and pray I never see either of you again." The Luna's awakening. The full moon ceremony was held in the grand courtyard, where centuries of Alpha Kings had been crowned and mated under the watchful eye of the moon goddess. Hundreds of wolves gathered in concentric circles around the raised dais, their faces painted silver by moonlight. Nora stood at the edge of the platform beside Lucian, her hands trembling despite the warmth of the ceremonial robes Kira had helped her into. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But Lucian had insisted, his eyes fierce with determination. "Let them see," he'd said. "Let them all see that you belong here." Now, with every pack in the Northern Territories watching, Nora wondered if this had been a terrible mistake. The elder spoke the ancient words, her voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "Under this moon, we bear witness to the bond between Alpha and Luna, king and queen, protector and healer. I object." The voice rang out clear and cold. Nora's stomach dropped as Celeste stepped from the crowd, Garrett a shadow at her side. She wore white, a deliberate insult, the color reserved for the Luna. Several gasps rippled through the assembly. "This ceremony is a farce," Celeste announced, her voice projecting beautifully. She'd always known how to work a crowd. "How can a rejected Packless Omega be worthy of the Alpha King? She has no lineage, no power, no wolf. She's broken, damaged goods that should have stayed hidden on her mountain instead of deceiving our king into believing she's something she's not. The crowd erupted. Voices rose in confusion and speculation. On the dais, Lucian went utterly still, the kind of stillness that preceded violence. Power radiated from him in waves, pressing down on the assembly until wolves began dropping to their knees. "You dare." His voice was barely recognizable, more growl than speech. The stone beneath his feet cracked. "You dare speak of my mate that way?" The temperature dropped. Frost spread across the courtyard stones. Several wolves whimpered and bared their throats in submission. Lucian's eyes had gone completely silver, his wolf pushing so close to the surface that his human form began to blur at the edges. He was going to kill her, right here, in front of everyone. And the terrifying part was that Nora felt a savage satisfaction at the thought. "Lucian," she touched his arm, and the contact sent a shock through them both. "Stop." She questioned your worth. She called you broken. His words came through clenched teeth. "No one speaks to you that way and lives." "I know." Nora's voice came out stronger than she felt. "But she's right about one thing. They deserve answers." She turned to face the assembled packs before Lucian could stop her. Hundreds of eyes stared back, some curious, some hostile, most simply confused. She found Lady Moira in the crowd, Marcus the skeptic, Kira with her hand on her weapon, and finally, Celeste wearing that cruel, triumphant smile. "You're right," Nora said, and her sister's smile widened. "I was rejected 2 years ago by Garrett Thorne of Silverbrook. He chose my sister instead, and the bond breaking nearly destroyed me. I lost my wolf. I lost my pack. I lost everything I thought defined who I was." The crowd was silent now, hanging on every word. "I hid on that mountain because I believed what he told me, that I wasn't strong enough, wasn't worthy enough, wasn't enough. I spent 2 years convinced that his rejection was the truth about my value." Her hand stopped shaking, but I was wrong. She turned to look at Lucian, and the fierce pride burning in his eyes gave her the courage to continue. "Rejection doesn't define worth. It defines the person who couldn't see it. And yes, I'm different. Yes, I'm not like other Omegas, but that doesn't make me broken." She faced the crowd again. "It makes me exactly what I was always meant to be." Power surged through her, sudden, overwhelming, originating from somewhere deep in her chest where her wolf had been sleeping, not dead, not gone, just waiting. "I choose Lucian Thorne as my mate," she said, and the words resonated with a force that shook the stones. "Not because I'm obligated, not because I'm grateful, but because he saw worth in me when I couldn't see it in myself, because he chose me every single day, even when I gave him every reason to walk away." The power built, silver light beginning to glow beneath her skin. "And I am done letting fear control my life, done letting other people's inability to see me determine how I see myself. I am Nora Ashwood, daughter of healers, and I claim this bond. I claim this mate. I claim my place as Luna of the Northern Crown." Lucian moved before she finished speaking, pulling her against him with desperate intensity. His teeth found the junction of her neck and shoulder, and when he bit down, the world exploded into light. The bond didn't just snap into place, it detonated. Silver radiance poured from Nora in waves, washing over the assembled wolves like a benediction. And inside her chest, in the place that had been empty for so long, her wolf finally rose. But it wasn't just any wolf. It was massive, primal, made of moonlight and starfire. A lunar Omega, Kira would whisper later in awe, born under a blood moon, the rarest of the rare. Nora felt her wolf's power flood through her, felt connections forming to every broken, traumatized wolf in the assembly. She could sense their pain, their damaged bonds, their buried trauma, and underneath the overwhelming sensation of her own transformation, she felt them beginning to heal. When the light finally faded, Nora stood in Lucien's arms with silver streaks now running through her platinum hair and her eyes glowing with inner luminescence. Around them, wolves were weeping, touching their chests in wonder as bonds they thought permanently severed began to mend. Celeste had fallen to her knees, her face drained of color. Garrett stared with an expression of absolute devastation, finally understanding what he'd rejected. But Nora didn't spare them another glance. She looked up at her mate, her king, her equal, her choice, and smiled. "Hello," Lucien breathed, touching her face with reverent wonder. "There you are. I've been waiting for you." "I know," Nora whispered back, finally, feeling whole. "I'm sorry it took so long." "You're worth the wait, little Luna. You've always been worth the wait." As he kissed her beneath the full moon, the assembled packs erupted in howls of celebration. And Nora, broken, rejected, forgotten Nora, finally understood that she had never been any of those things. She had simply been sleeping. And now, at last, she was awake,